There's a number that should be flashing on every screen in America right now, 5,000 and climbing. And if you don't understand what that number represents, if you don't grasp why it matters, you're missing the biggest story of 2026. Because that number, the price of gold per ounce, just crossed a threshold that financial analysts thought was impossible this year. They predicted it might happen by December if everything went sideways. It happened in January, in 3 weeks. And the reason it happened, the force driving it higher every single day, has a name: Donald Trump. Now I know what you're thinking. Another story blaming Trump for something. Another analysis claiming the sky is falling. But this isn't opinion. This isn't political spin. This is mathematics. This is trillions of dollars in capital flows, telling us something that nobody in mainstream media seems willing to say clearly. The world is losing faith in the United States of America. Not slowly, not gradually, rapidly, catastrophically. And the man in the Oval Office is the primary reason why. Let me take you inside what actually happened last week in Davos that triggered the avalanche. Because the coverage you saw, the clips on the news, they don't capture what that moment meant to the people in that room. Picture the scene. The Congress Center in Davos, Switzerland. World Economic Forum. Every January, the global elite converges on this alpine town. Presidents, prime ministers, CEOs of every major corporation on earth, central bankers who control the world's money supply, investors who move billions with a phone call, they're all there. And Donald Trump walks onto that stage to deliver remarks. The speech starts rambling almost immediately. Trump jumping from topic to topic without clear transitions, without a coherent thread. People in the audience exchanging glances. This is normal for Trump, they're thinking. This is what we expect. But then he says something that makes every person in that auditorium go completely still. He suggests, openly, publicly, in front of the entire assembled global leadership, the use of military force against America's NATO allies. Countries like Denmark over Greenland, NATO members, partners in a defensive alliance that has existed for 75 years, countries that have fought alongside American soldiers in every major conflict since World War II. The reaction in the room is visceral. You can see it in the footage if you know what to look for. Government officials sitting up straighter, CEOs leaning over to whisper urgently to their neighbors, central bankers making notes, because everyone in that room understands what Trump just did. Even if he doesn't, he took a sledgehammer to the foundation of American credibility. He demonstrated, in the clearest possible terms, that the United States under his leadership cannot be relied upon to honor its commitments, to respect its allies, to follow the basic norms that have governed international relations for nearly a century. And here's what makes this so significant, so dangerous, so potentially catastrophic for American power. Trump walked back the threats the next day, claimed he was misunderstood, said the media took his words out of context. His team scrambled to clean up the mess, to reassure allies, to say he didn't really mean military force. But it doesn't matter. You cannot unsay certain words. You cannot unring that bell. The damage was done the moment those words left his mouth, because trust, once broken, is almost impossible to restore. And Trump broke something fundamental in Davos. Within 72 hours of that speech, something extraordinary happened in global financial markets, something that connects directly, causally, to Trump's words in that Swiss auditorium. Gold prices, which had been climbing steadily for months, suddenly exploded upward, $5,000 per ounce, a level that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Silver, which is traditionally even more stable than gold, has now quadrupled in value over the past 12 months, 400% gains. These are metals that investors buy specifically because they're boring, because they're stable, because they don't do wild things. They're safe havens, stores of value. And they're moving like cryptocurrency during a bubble. But here's what you absolutely must understand about this. What's crucial to grasp. This isn't happening because people suddenly decided precious metals are undervalued. This isn't about supply and demand in the traditional sense. This is happening because of fear, specifically fear of what Donald Trump is doing to the United States and its position in the world. Every erratic statement, every institutional attack, every broken norm, every threat against an ally sends a signal to global investors. And that signal says, get your money out of America. Find somewhere safe. And increasingly, that somewhere safe is gold. Ipek Oskardeskaya, a senior analyst at Swissquote who's been following these markets for decades, said something this week that should be quoted in every newspaper. The global order is shifting, and trust is gone. Let me repeat those three words, because they carry more weight than almost anything else you'll hear about the economy this year. Trust is gone. Not damaged, not eroding, gone. Trust in America, trust in American institutions, trust in the dollar, trust in the fundamental stability that has made the United States the bedrock of the global financial system for 80 years. That trust is evaporating before our eyes. And trust, you have to understand, is the only thing that makes modern finance work. Paper money only has value because we collectively agree to trust it. Government bonds only function because we trust governments will repay them. International trade only happens because we trust that contracts will be honored, that rules will be followed, that tomorrow will look roughly like today. Remove trust and the entire edifice collapses. Trump is removing that trust, brick by brick, speech by speech, threat by threat. Let me show you exactly how this has been unfolding. Because Davos wasn't the beginning, it was the culmination, the moment when something that had been building finally broke through into undeniable crisis. Go back to April 2nd of last year. Liberation Day, Trump called it. The day he unveiled massive tariffs on allies and adversaries alike. Not targeted tariffs designed to address specific trade imbalances. Sweeping tariffs designed to punish, to coerce, to demonstrate American power. Markets panicked that day. The Dow dropped, the dollar wobbled, and gold ticked up. Just a few dollars. Nothing dramatic yet. But the pattern was established. Trump does something destabilizing. Money flows towards safety, and safety increasingly means gold. Throughout the rest of 2025, Trump kept escalating. He started threatening Canada with annexation. Not as a joke, not as a negotiating tactic, but with apparent seriousness, posting maps on social media showing Canada shaded as the 51st state. Calling the Canadian Prime Minister Governor Carney, deliberately using language that implies subordinate status, that treats a sovereign nation as a province. Every time he did this, every time he threatened America's closest ally, its largest trading partner, the country with which it shares the world's longest undefended border, gold moved higher. Still gradually, still in small increments, but consistently. The direction was clear. Then he began his assault on the Federal Reserve. And this is where things get really dangerous, where the implications become truly alarming. The Federal Reserve is the institution that manages the dollar, that sets interest rates, that controls monetary policy for the world's reserve currency. And its credibility, its ability to function, rests entirely on one principle: independence. The Fed must be independent from political pressure. Central banks around the world operate on this principle. It's fundamental. Without independence, without the ability to make decisions based on economics rather than politics, a central bank loses all credibility. Trump understands none of this, or understands it and doesn't care. He began publicly, repeatedly attacking Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, demanding rate cuts for political reasons, trying to bully the Fed into juicing the economy before elections regardless of economic fundamentals, treating the Fed as though it's just another part of his administration that should bend to his will. Every central banker in the world watched this happening. Every finance minister, every treasury official, every sophisticated investor. And they all drew the same conclusion. If Trump doesn't respect Fed independence, what else doesn't he respect? What other institutions will he attack? What other norms will he shatter? Gold climbed higher, still steady, still controlled, but the volume was increasing. More buyers entering the market. Not just retail investors worried about their savings, institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds. Central banks themselves starting to diversify away from dollars and into physical gold. The smart money was moving. Then came the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. Now, Whether you think Maduro deserved it, whether you believe he's a dictator who should face justice, that's not the point here. The point is how it happened, the way it was executed, the apparent disregard for international law, for established procedures, for the norms that govern how nations interact even with their adversaries. The message it sent to every government on earth. If the United States can do this to a head of state, even one they despise, what might they do to others? What rules do they actually follow anymore? Markets reacted immediately. Gold jumped. Not a small move anymore, a significant surge, because now the pattern was undeniable. Trump's America doesn't follow the old rules. Trump's America is unpredictable, aggressive, willing to overturn established norms whenever it suits political purposes. And unpredictability is poison in financial markets. Investors can handle a lot of things. They can invest in authoritarian countries. They can put money in unstable regions. They can tolerate risk. But they need to understand the rules of the game. They need predictability. And Trump offers the opposite of predictability. And then Davos happened. The speech that broke everything. The threat of military force against NATO allies. The rambling, incoherent performance that made America look weak and erratic simultaneously. The moment when global elites, the people who move trillions in capital, who make decisions that shape the world economy, collectively realized that American leadership cannot be counted on anymore. The fallout has been spectacular in the truest sense of that word, something to watch with amazement and horror. The US dollar dropped more than 2% in just days after Davos. In currency markets, where movements are usually measured in fractions of a percent, where a 1% move is considered significant, a 2% drop is an earthquake, its capital fleeing. The Australian dollar surged as money desperately searched for alternatives. The euro strengthened, the Canadian dollar rose. Money was leaving America, and it wasn't coming back. Not yet. Maybe not ever, while Trump remains in power. Interest rates on US money markets climbed and stayed elevated. Why? Because when money flows out of a country, when investors are selling dollars to buy other currencies or gold, demand for dollars drops. And when demand drops, the price to borrow dollars goes up. Those elevated interest rates are a symptom, a fever telling us the patient is sick, the patient being American financial dominance. But here's what makes this moment so much more significant than just Trump's latest outburst or another bad week in markets. This story actually begins almost a decade ago, and understanding that history is crucial to grasping what Trump is accelerating. Back in 2017, China began systematically selling its holdings of US government debt. Those treasury bonds, those IOUs backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, had been considered literally the safest investment on the entire planet, safer than anything. Safer than gold, even, most people thought. China's massive trade surpluses, all those dollars they earned selling goods to the world, had been flowing into US Treasury bonds for decades. China became America's banker, the largest foreign holder of US government debt, trillions of dollars. By buying all those bonds, China was essentially lending money to the US government, financing American budget deficits, enabling the United States to spend far more than it collected in taxes. It was a symbiotic relationship. China needed somewhere to park its dollars. America needed someone to buy its debt. Everyone benefited. But by 2017, as trade tensions started building, as the relationship between Washington and Beijing began deteriorating, Chinese leadership made a strategic calculation. This arrangement might not last forever. American policy might change. The dollar might not be as safe as it seemed. And most importantly, being so heavily invested in US debt gave America leverage over China. Financial leverage that could be weaponized. So they started diversifying, slowly at first, quietly, selling US bonds and buying gold instead, physical gold. Tons and tons of gold flowing into Chinese central bank vaults. Russia saw what China was doing and followed suit. Russia had its own reasons to worry about dollar dependence. American sanctions were becoming more frequent, more severe. And sanctions work by cutting countries off from the dollar-based financial system. If you're Russia, if you're worried about being sanctioned, holding dollars becomes risky. So they bought gold instead. Thousands of tons of gold. building reserves that couldn't be frozen by American action, couldn't be seized, couldn't be weaponized against them. Then India joined the pattern. Then other central banks started noticing. If China and Russia are moving away from dollars and into gold, they must know something. Or they're seeing risks the rest of us should pay attention to. And gradually, quietly, without fanfare or headlines, central banks around the world began diversifying their reserves. Less exposure to dollars, more exposure to gold. The shift was happening, slow but steady. The foundation of American financial dominance was developing cracks. But it was manageable. It was gradual. The dollar remained dominant. US Treasury bonds remained the safe haven. When there was a crisis anywhere in the world, money still flowed reflexively to America. The pattern held until Trump won in 2024. And everything that had been happening slowly went into hyperdrive. Because Trump isn't just continuing policies that were already causing concern among central bankers and investors. He's taking every concern, every worry, every doubt about American stability and amplifying it. He's validating every fear. He's proving that yes, America is exactly as unreliable as the pessimists worried it might become. The trade war isn't just about tariffs or trade imbalances or protecting American workers. It's about Trump treating America's closest allies as enemies. Canada, Mexico, the European Union, countries that have been partners for generations, suddenly facing threats and economic coercion, making it impossible for businesses to plan, impossible for governments to know whether agreements signed today will be honored tomorrow, impossible for investors to feel confident that the rules won't change on a whim. The attacks on Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve aren't just about interest rates or monetary policy. They're about Trump demonstrating day after day that he has no respect for institutional independence, that everything must bend to his personal will, that expertise doesn't matter, that tradition doesn't matter, that the norms and guardrails that make democratic institutions function don't matter if they get in his way. Every central banker watching this understands the implication. If the Fed isn't independent, the dollar isn't credible. The Maduro capture wasn't just about Venezuela or regime change or bringing a dictator to justice. It was about showing the world that American foreign policy under Trump is completely untethered from established international norms. That might makes right. That if Trump decides he wants something, he'll take it, and he doesn't particularly care what the rest of the world thinks about it. Every government watches this and recalculates. If America can do this to Venezuela, what might they do to us if we cross them? The Davos speech wasn't just rambling or embarrassing or unprofessional. It was Trump revealing, on the biggest global stage, that he's willing to threaten military force against countries that are supposed to be America's closest allies. That NATO means nothing to him. That partnership means nothing. That you're either submitting to American demands or you're an enemy. There's no middle ground, no relationship between equals, just dominance and submission. Every single one of these actions, every threat, every attack on institutions, every broken norm chips away at the foundation of American power. And that foundation is trust. Trust that America will honor its commitments. Trust that American institutions are stable and credible. Trust that the dollar will hold its value. Trust that today's ally won't be tomorrow's target. When that trust disappears, when confidence evaporates, American power evaporates with it. Because American power isn't really about military might, though that matters. It's about financial dominance, about the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. And that role exists only because the world chooses to use dollars. The moment they choose something else, that power is gone. Christopher Lowney, commodity strategist at RBC Capital Markets, published analysis this week that laid it out clearly. Uncertainty and macro factors, especially dollar weakness, have driven the gold positive backdrop, he wrote. Between trade policy, political instability, geopolitical chaos, and concerns about Federal Reserve independence, there are plenty of drivers supporting gold prices. And based on all our conversations in the first few weeks of this year, we do not think investor demand or central bank demand will fall away anytime soon. Let me translate that from analyst language into plain English. He's saying Trump has created so much chaos, so much instability, so much uncertainty about America's future, that sophisticated investors and central banks have no intention of trusting US assets again anytime soon. This isn't temporary. This isn't a blip that will reverse when markets calm down. This is a structural shift. The smart money has concluded that America under Trump is simply too risky, too unpredictable, too unstable, and they're moving their wealth accordingly. The search for safety has pivoted dramatically toward hard assets, physical things, real things, gold, obviously, but also silver, copper, lithium, rare earth elements, commodities with actual industrial uses, actual physical scarcity, actual value beyond what people agree they're worth. Paper promises from governments, especially promises from the United States government, no longer carry the automatic credibility they once possessed. People are asking questions they never asked before. Will America actually pay back its debts? Will the dollars they pay back with be worth what the dollars they borrowed were worth? Can we trust American institutions to function properly? Can we trust American leadership to be rational? These questions were unthinkable 10 years ago. The idea that you would seriously question whether the United States government would honor its debts, whether the dollar would remain stable, whether American institutions would continue functioning, it would have seemed absurd. America was the bedrock, the foundation, the one thing you could count on even when everything else was falling apart. And Trump has destroyed that assumption. Systematically, almost methodically, probably without even understanding what he's doing. Think about the numbers for a moment. Really sit with them. The US government owes $38 trillion. That's not a typo. 38 trillion. The debt accumulated over decades of deficit spending, of wars and recessions and stimulus packages and tax cuts. And that debt is only manageable. The US can only service that debt and keep borrowing more at reasonable interest rates because the world trusts that America will pay it back. Because the world believes in American stability, American strength, American reliability. But what happens when that trust vanishes? What happens when investors decide they'd rather own gold than own promises from a government led by someone who attacks his own central bank, threatens his own allies, makes policy through rambling speeches that contradict themselves, and demonstrates daily that he has no respect for institutional norms or international agreements? What happens when the world stops automatically trusting America? We're finding out right now. Gold at $5,000 and climbing. Silver up 400% in a year. The dollar weakening. Capital flowing out. These aren't abstract financial metrics. These are symptoms of a crisis in confidence. A crisis caused directly by Trump's behavior, by his words, by his actions, by his complete inability or unwillingness to understand that power rests on trust, and trust rests on predictability. And predictability requires respecting norms and institutions. Here's the profound irony that should be on the front page of every newspaper in America. Trump's entire political brand is based on making America great again, America first, putting American interest above everything else, making America strong, making America respected, making America powerful. And what's he actually achieving? He's making America weaker. He's destroying American power. He's causing global investors to flee American assets. He's undermining the dollar. He's shattering the institutional credibility that makes American influence possible. Money that would automatically, reflexively flow into the United States during times of crisis is going elsewhere. To Australia, to Canada, to Europe, to gold. To anywhere that seems more stable, more predictable, more trustworthy than Trump's America. The flight to safety, that pattern that has defined global finance for 80 years, where panicked investors buy dollars and US Treasury bonds, that pattern is breaking down. America is no longer the safe haven. Gold is the safe haven. That represents a tectonic shift in global power dynamics. And here's why this matters more than most people understand. Why this is about so much more than just gold prices or market movements. The dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is the foundation of everything else about American power. It's what allows the United States to run massive budget deficits year after year without facing a debt crisis. It's what lets America borrow trillions at low interest rates. It's what funds the military that maintains hundreds of bases around the world. It's what makes American sanctions devastating, because getting cut off from the dollar system means getting cut off from global trade. All of American power, military and economic and diplomatic, ultimately rests on the dollar's special status. And that status exists only because other countries choose to use dollars for international trade, choose to hold dollars as reserves, choose to denominate their debts in dollars, choose to trust dollars. The moment they choose something else, the moment they diversify away, the moment they decide gold or euros or even a basket of currencies is safer than dollars, American power diminishes dramatically. We're watching that choice happen in real time. China selling treasury bonds and buying gold, Russia building gold reserves, India diversifying, central banks around the world reducing dollar exposure. It's been gradual, manageable, something you could track in annual reports without panicking. But Trump is accelerating it dramatically. His chaos, his unpredictability, his attacks on institutions, his threats against allies, all of it pushes more countries to conclude they need alternatives to the dollar. They need to reduce their exposure to American economic coercion. They need to be less dependent on a country that might suddenly decide they're an enemy. Every time Trump does something erratic, every time he makes the world question American stability, that process accelerates. More money flows to gold. More central banks diversify their reserves. More countries explore alternatives to dollar-based trade. Each decision is individually small, rational, prudent risk management. But collectively, cumulatively, they represent the unwinding of American financial dominance, the end of the dollar era. And Trump is the catalyst. The data is screaming this message. Gold crossing $5,000, silver quadrupling, the dollar dropping 2% in days after Davos. Interest rates on US money markets staying elevated as capital flees. These aren't random market movements. These aren't noise or volatility or temporary fluctuations. This is trillions of dollars making a collective judgment. And that judgment is that America under Trump is too risky, too unstable, too unpredictable, not worth the risk. Markets are incredibly efficient information processors. All the collective wisdom, all the analysis, all the forecasting of thousands of professional investors and traders and analysts gets distilled into prices. And right now, prices are saying that trust in America is collapsing. Not slowly, not gradually, rapidly. The curve is accelerating, and acceleration is what should terrify you. Because when trust collapses slowly, you can adjust, you can adapt, you can manage the transition. When it collapses rapidly, you get crises, currency crises, debt crises, the kind of economic catastrophes that define generations. Trump promised Americans a golden age. He used those exact words during his campaign. A new golden age for America, prosperity and strength and greatness restored. And in the darkest, most ironic way imaginable, he's delivering a golden age. Just not the kind he promised. It's a golden age for gold. Gold has never been worth more. Gold miners are making record profits. Countries with large gold reserves are seeing their wealth increase dramatically. Anyone who bought gold 2 years ago and held on has made a fortune. But that golden age isn't happening because America is strong. It's happening because America is weak. Because Trump is making America weaker every single day. Because the world is watching American leadership and concluding they need to get their money somewhere safe, and America isn't safe anymore. The golden age Trump promised is built on the ruins of American credibility that he himself is creating. It's built on fear, on distrust, on the collapse of confidence in American institutions and American leadership. The US dollar dropped more than 2% since Davos. I keep coming back to this number because people don't understand what it means. 2% sounds small. 2% off a restaurant bill wouldn't matter. But in currency markets, for the world's reserve currency, 2% in a few days is massive. It represents hundreds of billions of dollars fleeing. It represents a collective judgment by markets that the dollar is overvalued given the risks, that holding dollars is dangerous, that the smart move is to sell. Interest rates tell the same story. They're elevated and staying elevated because there's not enough demand for dollars. When everyone wants dollars, interest rates drop because you don't have to pay much to borrow them. When people are selling dollars, trying to get out, interest rates rise because you have to pay more to convince anyone to lend them. Those elevated rates are costing the US government billions in additional interest payments on the $38 trillion in debt. Every day the rates stay high. America pays more to service debt, and the rates are high because of Trump. The Australian dollar is soaring. The euro is strengthening. The Canadian dollar rising. These aren't just technical movements. These are investors actively choosing alternatives to dollars, deciding that Australian assets or European assets or Canadian assets are safer than American assets right now. That represents an extraordinary reversal of historical patterns. For 80 years, when things got scary, everyone bought dollars. Now, when things get scary, they're selling dollars and buying anything else. That's how far trust has fallen. And once trust is lost, once that confidence evaporates, it's incredibly difficult to restore, maybe impossible. Trust takes decades to build. It took the entire post-World War II period to establish the dollar's dominance, to create the Bretton Woods system, to make America the unquestioned financial center of the world. 75 years of relatively stable, relatively predictable American leadership that made the world believe dollars were safe. Trump is destroying in months what took 3/4 of a century to build. He doesn't understand this, or doesn't care, or perhaps more frighteningly, thinks he can bully the world into submission, thinks threats and chaos somehow make America stronger, thinks destroying institutional credibility demonstrates strength rather than weakness. But markets don't work that way. Trust doesn't work that way. Power doesn't work that way. Every threat makes America weaker. Every attack on Powell makes the Fed less credible and the dollar less trustworthy. Every rambling speech makes America look unstable. Every broken norm makes investors more nervous. And nervous investors don't buy dollars. They buy gold. They flee to safety. And safety used to be America. Now safety is gold. That's the shift. That's the crisis. That's what the $5,000 gold price is telling us. You're watching American financial dominance collapse in real time, and the President of the United States is the primary cause. Not China, though China is positioning itself to benefit. Not Russia, though Russia saw this coming and prepared. Not some external adversary. Trump, his actions, his words. His complete disregard for how trust and credibility actually work in the global financial system. The irony would be funny if the consequences weren't so serious. This isn't about partisan politics. I don't care if you love Trump or hate him. I don't care about his policies on immigration or taxes or judges or anything else. This is about cold market reality. About trillions of dollars making rational decisions based on risk assessment, and those trillions are concluding that America under Trump represents unacceptable risk. That the combination of institutional attacks, norm-breaking, unpredictable threats, and general chaos makes U.S. assets too dangerous to hold at previous levels. So they're reallocating, moving money to gold primarily, but also to other safe havens, to other currencies, to hard assets that can't be devalued by erratic leadership. Every dollar that leaves, every ounce of gold purchased instead of U.S. Treasury bonds, represents a tiny decrease in American financial power. Multiply that by trillions in capital flows, and you're looking at a genuine historical inflection point, the kind of shift that determines which countries matter in the coming century, which countries have power, which countries can project influence. And right now, because of Trump, America is on the losing side of that shift. The trajectory is clear. The data all points in the same direction. Trust in America is collapsing. Dollar dominance is eroding. The safe haven status that has underpinned American power is evaporating. And it's accelerating. That acceleration is the terrifying part. Because once these processes start moving quickly, once confidence starts collapsing rapidly, they're very difficult to stop. You get feedback loops. Loss of confidence causes capital flight. Capital flight weakens the dollar. Dollar weakness validates the loss of confidence. More capital flees. The cycle reinforces itself. If this helped you understand what's really happening, why gold prices matter far beyond commodity markets, why Trump's chaos is directly destroying the foundation of American power, hit that like button and subscribe. because this story is far from over. It's accelerating. We're at the beginning of something that will be studied in economics courses for generations. The moment American financial dominance ended, the collapse of the dollar era. And it's happening because one man apparently cannot grasp that power rests on trust, and trust requires predictable, stable, institutionally grounded leadership. Tell me in the comments, are you buying gold? Have you already lost faith in America's direction? What do you think happens if the dollar loses its reserve currency status? What does American power look like without financial dominance? Because what happens over the next year, over Trump's remaining time in office, could determine whether the United States remains a genuine superpower or becomes just another large economy without special status. The stakes couldn't be higher. The trend couldn't be clearer. And Trump shows absolutely no signs of changing course or understanding the damage he's causing. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next one, when Trump does whatever unprecedented thing comes next, and we watch gold climb towards $6,000 on the ruins of American credibility.